I'm Kelsey, I've got my hat, and today I am filming my very first monthly recommendations video. Monthly Recommendations is a Goodreads group for booktubers and bloggers to share recommendations every month based on a certain assigned topic. It was created by Trina from Between Chapters and Kayla from Kayla Rain. I will link all of the information for the group below in the description. I have really enjoyed watching other people's videos from this group before, and so I am very excited to join in the fun. Now this month's topic is standalones, and I feel like this is a topic that's going to be easier or harder for people depending on what genres they tend to read more of. And I do read a lot of genres that tend to come in series. I read fantasy, I read sci-fi, I read young adult. But I do find that a lot of my favorite books, even within these genres, are standalones. So I could probably recommend a whole lot of books for this video, but since I like to be a little long-winded, I have chosen 3 books I want to talk about in depth and 2 books to give honorable mention shoutouts to. And I've chosen these books maybe not because they're my absolute favorite standalones of all time, but because these are books that I feel like I would really like to talk to the internet about right now. Actually, come to think of it, both of my full review videos that I've done so far on this channel are for standalone novels that fall under the general umbrella of fantasy and sci-fi. And those were reviews for Fudoki by Keej Johnson and Radiance by Catherine M. Valente. So I'm not going to be talking about those books in this video, but I'm going to link them in the description so that you can find them if you want to, because those are also books that I would recommend. The first book I've got here is a very popular book on BookTube, and one that I'm sure is going to show up in a lot of people's videos this month. And it's one I've even talked about on this channel before, but I thought it deserved another mention, and it is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is a 19th century historical fantasy novel that I think is very popular in part because it has a lot of elements that appeal broadly to a lot of different readers. This is about a magical competition set up by 2 magicians between their 2 protégés, Celia and Marco. And the venue for this competition is a magical traveling circus. This book has characters that I really cared about and an enjoyable romance story, but the thing that really makes this book worth reading is the circus itself and the beautiful, lovely, atmospheric way in which Erin Morgenstern just immerses you into the magic of the night circus. It's just sumptuous to read, and you want to be there. And the parts of this book that just take a break from any and all action and plot and just describe the experience of attending this circus were really the best parts of this book for me. This was a book that I just could not put down once I had started it. I could not put it down until I was finished. I want to say, and I haven't heard other people say this about this book, and I did not mention it when I talked about it in my very first BookTube video, is that I think the book description here contains a major spoiler. And if you've read this book, you probably know what it is. And if you think it's a spoiler too, or if you think it's not a spoiler, I would love to hear from you in the comments. But I feel like there is a major plot through line in this book where there are hints all along the way, but there's something that would be a big reveal toward the end if it hadn't been in the description. And I think I would have enjoyed this book better if the publishers hadn't decided to just give that away in the book description. So if you are one of the people watching BookTube who somehow has not read this yet and hasn't read the description of this book but is thinking of picking it up, I don't know how many people like that there are who might be watching this video, but I would actually recommend going into this without reading that. I think your enjoyment might be greater if you do. The next book I want to talk about is by my favorite author, McKinley, and she is a fantasy writer who writes primarily standalones. So I could just talk about a ton of her books in this video, but I won't. I'm going to limit myself to talking about just one, so that there are still McKinley books that I can introduce to you on this channel at later dates. And I have chosen the book that I have chosen in part because its standalone status is somewhat controversial, and that is Sunshine. Sunshine is a standalone novel. I think there is a contingent of readers of this book who feel that the ending is not sufficient and that it needs a sequel because there are things that are unresolved at the end of this book. And this is something that the author has been very vehement about in stating that no, Sunshine does not have a sequel, Sunshine does not need a sequel, and this is something where I agree with the author personally entirely. This is an urban fantasy novel about a young woman who is the baker at her stepfather's family-run coffee house. And this is a vampire novel, and I very, very rarely enjoy vampire stories. And before I read this book, I would have gone so far as to say, no, I don't like books about vampires. I won't read books about vampires. And I almost didn't read this book because I knew I didn't like vampires. And that would have been a mistake on my part. So that, my friends, is today's lesson in open-mindedness. Because in the past 2 years since I first picked this book up, I have now read this book 3 times. And this book might not be everyone's cup of tea. There are some critiques of McKinley's writing style in this book from people who find it frankly unreadable, because McKinley loves going off on tangents in her writing. But that's something that I personally enjoy, and I think she uses it to great effect in telling this story and developing the world of this book in a way that's really sort of different from anything else I've read. This book starts in a really mundane place, but because of some of these maybe rambly, maybe info-dumpy tangents that our first-person narrator takes us on, we do start to see some bigger picture stuff that's gradually introduced in a way that was kind of mind-bending for me. And I find this book to be really richly layered. I find new things to take out of it every time I read it. I see different things as being important in it. And guys, it's also funny. There's great wry humor in the protagonist's narration of this story, and I find that delightful. Basically, this is about a young woman. I think she's like 24 in this, maybe 23, I'm not sure. Anyway, she's about as normal as it gets, until she gets mixed up in some vampire stuff. And I'm not gonna tell you too much more about the plot, but I will give you my take on some of the themes in this book. In a lot of McKinley's work, she sort of explores this idea of the other and what it is to come to an understanding with something that is fundamentally different from yourself. Cue vampires. I like that this book kind of toys with the notion of vampire romance and then rejects it for all of the no, actually really bad idea reasons that are why I tend to reject vampire romance. I also love that the protagonist in this book handles some things very, very poorly, but in a way that totally makes sense. We'd like to believe that if the crazy, outrageous circumstances that happen to the protagonists of fantasy novels happened to us, yes, we would be brave and true and we would save the world. We might suffer some inner turmoil as they do, but we would rise and we would triumph. And this is a book that made me sort of stop and think, no, yeah, I would not handle these things any better than she does. In fact, most people probably wouldn't. and I did not think any less of her because it felt so realistic to me. And that's sort of why I'm totally on board with the Sunshine Does Not Need a Sequel bandwagon. Because in real life, there aren't tidy answers at age 24 at the end of the book. In real life, all of the secrets of your past are not going to necessarily show you the way to save the world. What happens in this book is enough. Major things are achieved. Hopefully thoughts are provoked. And it doesn't need a sequel just because she hasn't saved the world yet and because all of your questions aren't answered. The last book that I'm going to talk about in depth here is a really unusual fantasy novel. It's also a little difficult to find, and that is Lifelode by Jo Walton. This comes from a smaller publisher than Jo Walton's other books, so your library might not have it, mine didn't, but it is available on Amazon, both new and used. And this is an adult fantasy novel that takes place in a world where the further you go east or west, both magic, which is known in this world as Yaya, and time behave differently. So time goes faster or slower in one direction than in the other, and I forget which direction is which. And same with more magic versus less magic. This book centers around the family of the manor house in a small community called Applecirk. And Applecirk is geographically in the middle. And it centers around the arrival of two strangers to Applecirk, one from the east and one from the west, and the disturbances that their presence brings to the family and to the community. This book centers around the character of Taveth, who is essentially the housewife of the manor house, and she has the ability to see people and things through time, so she can see people at different points in their lives. And so to go with that, parts of this book are told in a non-linear fashion. Something that I want to mention about this book is that it features non-traditional family structures and romantic relationships that are the norm within this world. And there is a major plot thread that ends up centering around those ideas. The main family in this book is a 4-adult household with children resulting from different pairings. And in the world of this book, that's completely normal. So if that's the sort of social issue that you are interested in reading about in a fantasy novel, I would really recommend that you pick this up. This is a book that I think, because it has to do a lot with time and how we change over time, this is a book that I'm going to want to read again when I'm older and see it with different eyes. But I thought overall it was really beautiful, and it was heartbreaking and really complex. The next two books are books I want to give honorable mentions to that I read. I read both of these somewhere around my freshman year of college, and it's been a while, so I don't remember them clearly enough to talk about them in great detail, but they're both very popular books, and they are both standalones. And they are The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger and The Art of Racing in the Rain by Garth Stein. These are both books that I have been thinking about recently shuffling back into the TBR wasteland for a reread because it's been too long. These books, I remember both of them just being emotional roller coasters in the best possible way. The Time Traveler's Wife has got to be one of the best time travel books I've ever read. I don't really enjoy the idea of time travel in books very much, but this book used it in a great way to explore a relationship in a sort of unusual manner. And The Art of Racing in the Rain is about an aging dog who relays for us events in the life of his owner, whom he loves unconditionally. I'm from the Seattle area, and this author is a Seattle area author, and his books take place in the Seattle area. So I remember feeling very homesick my freshman year at college in my dorm reading this book. So these are books that for me are due for a reread sometime soon. In part because I thought, oh, they both need to be in this video, and then I thought, do I remember them well enough to talk about them on BookTube? But they're both very popular and with good reason. And that is the end of this video! I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to bringing you more monthly recommendations in the future. Okay, bye for now.